Hello, students! In tonight's lesson, we will explore the characteristics of life. Let's get started. As you know, our course of study this year is biology, which, by definition, is the study of life. So if we're going to study life, we must first know how to tell the difference between things that are living and things that are not living. So let's take a look at some of the pictures here. We've got some non-living things like the train, the lava lamp, and the robot, as well as some living plants and animals. So what is it that makes the plants and animals living, while the other things are non-living? Only living things can claim all 8 of the following characteristics. 1. Living things are made of cells. 2. Living things grow and develop. 3. Living things reproduce. 4. Living things respond to stimuli in their environment. 5. Living things maintain homeostasis in their internal environments. 6. Living things have complex chemistry. 7. Living things use DNA as hereditary material. And finally, number 8, living things evolve. Now, I know some of these terms and concepts may be unfamiliar to you, so I will discuss each one in detail on a separate slide. Before moving on, it is important to understand that non-living things may exhibit some characteristics of some of the characteristics that we've listed above. For example, the old train is using energy released from coal. The shape of the lava in the lava lamp grows and changes over time. And the robot may be able to respond to certain things in its environment. However, only living things exhibit all 8 of the characteristics, and therefore earn the designation of organism. Okay, so let's begin to elaborate on each of the 8 characteristics so that we really understand their meaning. We'll begin with characteristic 1, which is that living things are made of cells. When examining organisms, one of the most absolutely fascinating things is that scientists have found, no matter what organism they're studying, that each one is exquisitely and logically organized from small, basic units called cells. Some organisms have a unicellular organization, while others have a multicellular organization. To be unicellular means that you are made of only one cell. And I have some examples here of unicellular organisms. Amoebae, Paramecia, Euglena are all examples of unicellular organisms. The other type of organization is multicellular organization. To be multicellular means to be an organism made of many cells. We have some multicellular organisms pictured below, organisms that fall into kingdoms such as plant, animals, and many kinds of fungi are multicellular. The second characteristic of living things is that they grow and develop. Now, we must distinguish between the words grow and develop because although they are often used together, they do not mean the same thing. To grow means to increase in size. For unicellular organisms, this simply means the organism's one cell expands to get bigger. However, for a multicellular organism to grow, it actually has to increase the total number of cells that it has. In contrast to the term grow, which simply means to increase in size, the term develop means to change over time. You can see in the pictures below how the jellyfish, the plant, and the salmon all change their forms and structures throughout their lives. These changes in form and structure are examples of development. The third characteristic of living things is that living things reproduce. Reproduction refers to any process by which an organism makes one or more new organisms. Now, while it is true that some individuals within a population might not reproduce, other individuals of the species must reproduce in order for the entire species to carry on and survive. It is also important to remember that although all organisms reproduce, they do not all reproduce in the same way. In fact, as we'll study this year, methods of reproduction vary widely throughout the species of the Earth. Some species of organisms require mates, while others do not. Some species have specialized cells just for reproduction. In some species, hundreds of offsprings might be produced, while in others, only one or two will be produced at a time. We can actually see this below. On the left, we have an example of a kalanchoe plant reproducing asexually, and you can see along the edge of the plant several of its offspring all at once. And then on the other hand, we have our polar bear with its cute little cub. Organisms like polar bears will have only one or two offspring at the same time. The fourth characteristic of living things is that they respond to stimuli. Let's begin by defining the word stimulus as an action or event that causes an organism to do something, or in other words, respond, and by recognizing that some stimuli can be external, which means originating from the outside environment, or internal, which means originating from within the organism itself. I've got a couple examples shown below. Let's see if we can identify the stimulus and response in each. In the left picture, the action or event, or in other words, the stimulus, is the crab's pinch. This stimulus causes the organism, in this case the human, to respond by flinching and shouting, "Ouch." Okay, let's look over to the picture all the way to the right. In the right picture, the plant in the fallen pot changes its direction of growth in response to the stimulus of the light above it. All right, now look at the middle picture. On your own, I'd like you to identify the stimulus and response demonstrated in the picture, and we'll go over your ideas in class tomorrow. The fifth characteristic of living things is that they maintain homeostasis. Homeostasis is the ability to maintain steady internal conditions even when outside conditions change. Our Earth is a dynamic place, and the environments that organisms live in are constantly changing. Temperature, rainfall, nutrient availability, and many other factors vary from day to day, and even over shorter times from minute to minute. So, what are some internal factors that organisms might want to control or keep in a steady balance, even as outside factors are changing? Well, to begin with, temperature. We don't want our internal temperatures getting too high or too low. We need it to stay in an optimal range. Same with the amount of water in our bodies, as well as the amount of salt and nutrients. Organisms that breathe oxygen and exchange it for carbon dioxide will also need to regulate how much of those gases they have. along with their heart rates and blood pressure. And there are many, many more things we could go on and on with this, but that's a good start of types of conditions that need to be regulated. Now, what happens when one of these conditions becomes unbalanced? Let's look at one specific factor, temperature, to see how homeostasis works, and then we'll explore more examples during class. All right, let's start by establishing that humans have an ideal internal temperature range under which they function effectively, between 35 and 37.5 degrees Celsius. If the temperature starts, If the temperature starts to fall below this range, then the organism will initiate a response to bring the temperature back up into a stable range. In this case, the response is shivering. The opposite can happen as well. If the organism's temperature gets too high, a different homeostatic response, sweating, can bring it back down into a stable range. So, even though outside conditions are changing, the organism is able to control its own inside environment. The sixth characteristic of living things is that they have complex chemistry. This is because all processes that organisms perform to stay alive require energy, and energy is obtained through complex chemical reactions. You may have learned previously about how plants use the complex chemical reaction called photosynthesis to convert or store energy. Or perhaps you have learned about another complex chemical reaction called cellular respiration, which is used to break down food and release energy. There are hundreds of different kinds of chemical reactions constantly occurring within an organism's cells. These reactions are responsible for things such as building new cellular structures, breaking down waste, keeping nutrients balanced, and much, much more. The seventh characteristic of life is that living things use DNA as hereditary material. Later this year, we will learn that an organism's instructions come in the form of DNA, and that these instructions have all the information an organism needs for its structure and its function. DNA is passed down or inherited from an organism's parents, which explains why offspring are so much like their parents, like the ducklings and their mother pictured at the bottom right. Finally, the eighth characteristic of life is that living things evolve. Evolution is the change in the inherited characteristics of a species over time. You can see here from the sequences of ancestral organisms related to our modern horse and modern elephant that the species that exist today did not always exist, but evolved slowly over time. Later this year, we'll discuss evidence for evolution, such as the fossils you see in the bottom right corner here. Importantly, the ability to evolve results in organisms that are well adapted to their environments, which is another topic we'll dive deeper into as the year goes on. All right, students, that's all for tonight. Make sure you have your notes filled out and write down any questions you have for class tomorrow. See you then.